Final update. My husband left me during pregnancy complications to marry his ex who has cancer because she wants to die as his wife, not his ex. He said our baby could wait but she couldn't. When I went into early labor alone, he texted can't come, at the wedding. I delivered our premature son by myself while he was saying vows to another woman. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source, Melissa's family. 2 weeks after the custody hearing, I received a call from Melissa's sister, Sarah. Rachel? This is Sarah Mitchell, Melissa's sister. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Of course, I said, though I was confused about why she'd want to talk to me. I wanted to apologize, Sarah said, her voice shaking. For what David did. For what my sister asked him to do. I was quiet, not sure how to respond. The thing is, Sarah continued, Melissa knew about you. She knew you were pregnant. She knew you were high risk. And she asked him to marry her anyway. My blood went cold. What? She'd been following your social media for months. She knew everything about your pregnancy, your due date, your complications. When she asked David to marry her, she knew there was a chance you'd go into labor during their wedding. I felt sick. She knew? She said if David really loved her, he'd choose her over anyone else, even his pregnant wife. She said it was the ultimate test of his devotion. I had to sit down. Are you telling me this was all planned? That she deliberately tried to make him choose between us? I'm so sorry, Sarah sobbed. I tried to talk her out of it. I told her it was wrong, that you were innocent in all this. But she was dying, and she was bitter about David moving on with his life. She wanted to know that she still came first for him. And David knew this? I think he convinced himself it was about giving her peace. But yes, he knew she was asking him to choose. And he chose her. After Sarah hung up, I sat in Oliver's nursery and cried. Not just because David had abandoned us, but because it had been calculated. Melissa had deliberately orchestrated a situation where David would have to choose between his dying ex and his pregnant wife, and David had made his choice. When I told my lawyer about Sarah's call, she immediately filed a motion to terminate David's visitation rights entirely. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment, she argued in court. This was a deliberate choice to abandon his family for another woman, made with full knowledge that his wife might go into labor while he was marrying someone else. The judge was even more appalled by this revelation. Mr. Thompson, she said, you were aware that your ex-girlfriend was asking you to choose between her and your pregnant wife? David's new lawyer, he'd fired the first one after the custody disaster, tried to object, but David answered anyway. She was dying, he said quietly. I thought I could do both. Be there for her and still be there for Rachel and the baby. But when forced to choose, you chose your ex-girlfriend over your wife and child. I thought the baby wouldn't come yet, David said weakly. That's not what I asked, Mr. Thompson. When forced to choose between your dying ex-girlfriend and your pregnant wife, you chose your ex-girlfriend. Yes or no? David was quiet for a long moment. Then, barely audibly, yes. And you married this other woman while your wife was in labor? Yes. And you sent your wife a wedding photo while she was caring for your premature infant? I was happy that Melissa got her wish before she died. I wanted to share that. The judge stared at David for a full minute. Then she said, Mr. Thompson, in 30 years on this bench, I have never encountered such a fundamental failure of character. Visitation is terminated permanently. You may file for reconsideration when the child turns 18. David broke down completely. Please, he sobbed. He's my son. I love him. You should have thought about that before you married someone else during his birth, the judge said coldly. Update 3. It's been 6 months since Oliver was born, and 4 months since David's visitation rights were terminated. Oliver is thriving now, he's caught up to his expected weight and is hitting all his developmental milestones. He's the happiest baby, always smiling and babbling, completely unaware of the drama that surrounded his birth. David has tried to contact me several times, mostly through intermediaries since I have a restraining order against direct contact. His mother called me last week, begging me to reconsider. He made a terrible mistake, she said, crying. But he's learned from it. He's in therapy now, trying to understand why he made such a poor choice. Mrs. Thompson, I said gently, I'm glad David is getting help. But he didn't make a mistake, he made a choice. When faced with choosing between his dying ex-girlfriend and his pregnant wife, he chose her. That's not a mistake you learn from, it's a fundamental character flaw. But Oliver needs his father, she protested. Oliver needs protection from a father who would abandon him for another woman, I replied. David already proved that when push comes to shove, Oliver isn't his priority. David also tried to reach me through Sarah, Melissa's sister, which was particularly twisted. He asked me to tell you that he understands now how wrong he was, Sarah told me when she called. He says he was manipulated by Melissa, that she took advantage of his grief and guilt to make him do something he never would have done otherwise. Do you believe that? I asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I think Melissa was manipulative, yes. But I also think a man who truly loved his wife and wanted to be a father wouldn't have been manipulatable in that way. My sister could only take advantage of feelings that were already there. She was right. Melissa hadn't hypnotized David or held a gun to his head. She'd simply offered him a choice between his past and his future, and he'd chosen his past. The most disturbing contact came through my own sister, who called me in tears last month. "Rachel, David came to see me today," she said, sobbing. "He begged me to convince you to let him see Oliver." "What did you tell him?" "I told him he was insane for even asking. But Rachel, he looks terrible. He's lost so much weight, and he seems genuinely broken up about everything." "Good," I said without hesitation. "That's not like you," my sister said carefully. "You're not usually vindictive." "I'm not being vindictive," I explained. "I'm being protective. David chose another woman over his son once, and he could do it again. What happens the next time someone needs him more than Oliver does? What happens when David finds another girlfriend who demands to come first?" My sister couldn't argue with that logic. "The truth is, I don't hate David. I feel sorry for him. He threw away his marriage, his relationship with his son, and his reputation for a woman who used him to get revenge on his new life. Melissa got exactly what she wanted. She destroyed our marriage from beyond the grave and ensured that David would be miserable forever. But my pity for David doesn't override my responsibility to protect Oliver. My son deserves better than a father who would abandon him for another woman's deathbed wishes. I've started dating someone new, a pediatric nurse named James who I met during one of Oliver's follow-up appointments. James understands that Oliver comes first, always and without question. When I told him about David and Melissa, he said something that really stuck with me. A real man doesn't abandon his pregnant wife for anyone, under any circumstances. I don't care if it's his dying mother, his dying ex, or the Pope himself. You stand by your wife and child, period. That's the kind of man I want in Oliver's life, someone who understands that family means loyalty, not conditional support that disappears when things get complicated. Final update. Last week, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a letter from David and a small wooden toy truck that he'd apparently made in some kind of woodworking class. The letter was 20 pages long, detailing his regrets, his therapy sessions, and his desperate desire to be part of Oliver's life. He wrote about how he'd realized that Melissa had manipulated him, how he'd been grieving their college relationship rather than thinking clearly about his current family. "I know I can never undo what I did," he wrote. "I know I can never take back the fact that I wasn't there when Oliver was born. But I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to both of you. I want to be the father Oliver deserves and the man you thought you married." The letter went on to describe his therapy revelations about how he'd never properly grieved his relationship with Melissa, how her cancer diagnosis had brought up unresolved feelings, and how he'd let those feelings cloud his judgment about what was truly important. But then, in the middle of all his self-reflection and apologies, David wrote something that showed me he still didn't understand what he'd done. "I know you think I chose Melissa over you and Oliver, but it wasn't that simple. She was dying, Rachel. How could I say no to a dying woman's last wish? How could I live with myself knowing I'd let her die alone and afraid when I could have given her peace?" There it was, the same justification, the same self-pity, the same inability to understand that his first loyalty should have been to his wife and child. I threw the letter away without finishing it. But I kept the toy truck, not for sentimental reasons, but as evidence. Because someday, when Oliver is old enough to ask about his father, I'll show him that truck and explain that his father made it in a woodworking class instead of being present for his son's first months of life. Oliver is 8 months old now and has no memory of David. When he looks around our house, he sees photos of me, my family, James, and our chosen family of friends who showed up when we needed them. He doesn't see photos of the man who married someone else during his birth. James and I have been talking about the future, about potentially moving in together and maybe even marriage down the line. Oliver adores James, reaching for him when he cries and giggling when James makes funny faces. It's the kind of relationship I always imagined David would have with his son. "Do you think David will ever stop trying to contact you?" James asked me the other night as we watched Oliver play with his blocks. "Probably not," I said. "But it doesn't matter. Oliver has everything he needs without him." "And what about you? Do you have everything you need?" I looked at my healthy, happy son, then at the man who'd chosen to love us both unconditionally, and I realized I did. "I have more than I need," I told him. "I have a son who will grow up knowing his worth isn't conditional on other people's convenience. And I have someone who understands that love means showing up, especially when it's hard." David made his choice on the day Oliver was born. He chose a dying woman's comfort over his son's first breath, and that choice will define him for the rest of his life. But I made my choice too. I chose Oliver's future over David's regrets. And unlike David's choice, mine is one I'll never have reason to regret. My son will grow up knowing that his mother fought for him from his very first day, that she chose his well-being over everything else, and that real love doesn't come with conditions or expiration dates. David can keep his wooden toys and his therapy revelations. Oliver and I have something better. We have each other, and we have people who would never ask us to choose between love and loyalty. Because in a real family, you never have to choose.